Well, this is an interview with Dr. J. Chris Hawk III, who served as president of the State Medical Association in 1991 and 92. Interview is conducted by Dr. Laurie Brown, honorary member of the Society, and Monya Green in Charleston in Dr. Hawk's office on November 25th, 1992. And we'll talk to Dr. Hawk about his term as president, and then anything that he wants to add, we'd be glad to have it. Dr. Hawk, first thing I'm going to ask you a little bit about your family, your background, where you were born, who your parents were, just a little bit about your family of origin, and sort of where you grew up.
I was born in Charlottesville, Virginia. My father was a resident in surgery at the time at the University of Virginia. We moved to Charleston, South Carolina when I was 4, and I grew up in Charleston, attended the public schools, and then went to college at Davidson and then subsequently to Vanderbilt Medical School. I was one of 9 children, second oldest. We had a close family. It was a lot of fun growing up. I never felt like there was any particular pressure on me, for example, to go to medical school, but I think I sort of always leaned towards being a physician. My father is a well-known member of the medical profession and the medical society, having served as president about the time that I came back to South Carolina. My mother is now an attorney, but at the time that I was growing up, she was a full-time mother and subsequently was chosen as the American Mother of the Year. So I had very strong parents who obviously had a lot to do with my subsequent career.
All right. And in medical school, you were at Vanderbilt?
Yes.
In medical school, tell me just a little bit about medical school. Was it hard? And what was some of your...
I remember when I went over to Vanderbilt to interview that one of the people who I had known from college said that medical school was just like college, except there weren't any liberal arts courses. You spent all your time studying science. And I remember that we basically worked all the time during the day in classes and labs and at night studying. But it wasn't that tough. It required a lot of work, and I think everybody did a lot of work, but it wasn't overwhelming. I enjoyed the time that I was in medical school, and I don't think it was until I went on and became a resident in Boston later that I realized just how good the education had been that I had received in medical school. There were some people who I was very influenced by when I was a medical student. One was a pathology professor who taught surgical pathology. He was a crusty old guy. He had actually been a friend of my father's in their training as cancer surgeons, and I really enjoyed him and took a real interest in cancer in part because of him. Another physician who influenced me strongly was a pathologist who taught the second-year pathology class. He was just an outstanding teacher, and yet was a great friend to a number of students. And I still have tremendous admiration for him, and in fact I plan to see him when I go to Nashville next week for the AMA meeting.
Good.
The third person who was a tremendous influence on me as a medical student was an internist who taught all the third-year students. He had an incredible love not only for teaching but also being a physician, but he had tremendous dedication to doing absolutely the best that anyone could do, and I really was inspired by him, I think, to be the best physician that I could be.
And how did you decide what type of specialist you would be? Was there any particular...
Well, at that time, Vanderbilt had almost all of its graduates going into into specialties. They had very few people who went into family practice. I think I had always leaned a little bit towards surgery because of my father's influence. Not that he talked to me about it or pressured me, but just that I was interested in what he did, and I was a little bit more attracted to that. And as I went through the rotations as a third-year student, I think I enjoyed surgery the most, and I decided then that that was what I would do. And as a consequence, I did sort of a mini internship as a fourth-year student, taking no surgery but taking everything else, so that I could sort of get a lot of internal medicine before I started my surgical training.
And then after your surgical training, you decided to come back to Charleston.
Right. I trained in surgery in Boston at the Mass General, which I was concerned would be a cold, stuffy place up north, but actually was a very warm place in terms of the support that the various staff gave the physicians. I finished training there, and about the time that I was finishing and looking for a job, I decided to go into practice with my father. He was practicing alone at that time in private practice, and probably I'd always had it in the back of my mind that I might come back to Charleston, but we really never talked about it or made a decision until I was just about finished my training. Before I came back, I served for a year and a half with the military in Japan, which was a little bit shorter stint than expected, but because I was on an unaccompanied tour, I was allowed out early, and came back to Charleston after I finished in the military.
Well, did you get to visit your father and mother's old home in China while you were in that section of the
No,
world?
I didn't go to China. They had significant restrictions on who could visit China, and although I traveled some in the Orient, I was stationed in Japan, I went to Korea and Taiwan and Singapore. I did not ever visit mainland China, and I still have not visited there either.
That's there. Now, were you married during your residency, or?
I married before the start of my fourth year in medical school to someone that I had met at my sister's wedding. My older sister Margaret had a friend who came to her wedding, and I met Fran there, and we dated while we were seniors in college, and then she worked in the Far East for 2 years, and when she came back, we got married after that. When we were in Boston, we had our 4 children, including twins, while I was the chief resident.
And what was Fran's name?
Fran Solly is her name.
Your children are sort of beginning to grow up a little bit, aren't they? You know,
Right, my daughter is now a sophomore at Dartmouth College. She has an interest in possibly going to medical school. My twin boys are juniors in high school this year, and my youngest son is in the 9th grade in high school.
Dr. Hawk, how did you sort of get your beginning in what we say is organized medicine, medical, I don't want to say the hierarchy, but medical policy making, etc., medical society work, such as that?
Well, I got started in an unusual way because my father was the president of the State Medical Association when I moved back to Charleston and went into practice with him. And I've actually jokingly said that I was taking call for him before I had a license, which is true, just because it takes a couple of weeks to get your license, and he was traveling frequently on the weekends with medical society business. So I had that introduction, watching him as the year that he was the president. The first committee that I served with was about 1979 on voluntary cost containment. And it's interesting to see what's happened in the 13 years since then, because we haven't made any progress really in terms of cost containment. But the thrust at that time was voluntary, and for those of us who took it seriously, it could make a difference, but it's never been done seriously, unfortunately. When I first started, the first job I really had with the Medical Society was as a trustee, and that was about 1985. the prior trustee had finished his term, and nobody else was really interested in committing the time that was necessary. And I was interested at some point in being the trustee and volunteered then, even though I think I was pretty early on. I guess I was 38 or so, and that, in my opinion, was pretty young to be starting as a trustee. But that's when I started.
In the county society, you were active even before that, weren't you?
I was active in the county society from the time that I got to town, working on things like the nominating committee and the long-range planning committee, but I never had any formal office with the county society.
Now, you said something about cost containment. What were some of the real major issues during your term as president of the state association?
Well, there were really three major issues during my year. The first was RBRBS, which is the resource-based relative value scale. It was the result of about 10 years of work to change the reimbursement for physicians, primarily in Medicare, but I suspect everybody thinks it'll work down to other insurance companies as well, but to have better reimbursement for cognitive work or primary care and less for specialty work or procedures. And the reason that that was a hot issue was that when the federal government came out with its fee schedule, it included a 16% cut for a lot of things such as behavioral offset, and it took a real grassroots effort to get anything done about that. And we were able, through writing letters and contacting our congressman, to get that 16% reduction down to about 5%. The second major issue was HIV testing for physicians and other healthcare workers. Shortly after my year started, the CDC issued its recommendations for testing of healthcare workers, and that was that people who did invasive procedures should know their HIV status. At the state level, we decided that it was appropriate to have a testing mechanism so that if the physicians in a state wanted to be tested, that we could ensure their confidentiality. And we started working to set up what is subsequently called the HIV/HBV Safety Network, and physicians and other healthcare workers can be tested under that system with confidentiality. As it's gotten started, it's really turned out that this is the expert panel, so that physicians or other healthcare workers can come to this panel and find out how they need to modify their practice and whether there should be any restrictions on it. This has just been going on for the past year, but I think it is going to be an important thing, important committee for physicians over the next few years. The third major issue that faced the medical society and all the medical profession was the whole issue of healthcare reform. And there were 50 or so bills before the U.S. Congress during my time. None of them passed, but that is still a major issue. We had a large issue in our state society, in our state legislature, which was Representative Billy Houck's bill, which would have changed the way that hospitals and physicians are reimbursed so that their prices or fees could only go up a certain amount each year. It would be based on whatever the rise in the CPI was. That bill was strongly opposed by the hospitals and by a number of physicians, and it created quite a furor within the profession. I think that we may look back on that bill a few years from now and wish that we had something that did as much to protect physicians as that bill actually did. But those were really the main issues that we faced as a state medical association during my presidency.
And I take it you're fairly well satisfied with how these issues
well, they were not issues
resolved, no.
They're not issues that could be resolved or solved during 1 year. I think that the progress that we made on them during the course of a year was satisfactory. For example, on the RBRBS, I think that we were able to keep physicians in a cooperative mood so that they were willing to work to see that this change was successful. It's still too early to say what will happen with that, but I think that is the basis for appropriate reimbursement of physicians in the future. And I think that we made a good start towards the HIV testing system. I think in ways it's a tremendous waste of money, but I think that as physicians we needed protection from what the federal government was requiring, and I think that this is as good a way as there is to do it.
Is there anything else that you would like to say about what went on during your term as president?
Well, I gave my inauguration speech on what I call the ABCs of being a good physician. I had heard, obviously, a lot of speeches over the years that concentrated on things that organized medicine was doing, and it seemed to me that physicians were hassled to the point that many of them were so frustrated they were thinking about what else they should be doing. And I thought it was important to try to address that and to encourage them in their work, and also to encourage them to be good physicians. And so I talked about the things beyond ability that make a good physician. I talked about bedside manner, community service, dignity for your patients, ethics, fun, setting goals, and humor. And as I look back on it, that message was very well received. A lot of people commented on it after they read about it in the journal, and I decided to take that theme around with me throughout the year as I spoke to county medical societies and other groups, because I think that we can be good physicians despite all the hassles that involve our practice, all the regulations, all the red tape, all the changes that are coming back, and the bad press that we're getting. And I think it's important that we do that, and that we be the best physicians that we can be. I was talking to someone recently about this, and it really occurred to me that the role model for that good physician, if you will, was my father. And I don't really know anybody who embodied that better than he did. He was a superb clinician. He was well respected by his colleagues. He was loved by his patients, and yet he did more to serve organized medicine in this state than, or did as much as any physician of his generation. And I think it's a tremendous credit to him that the job that he did, and I'm proud to have been able to follow in his footsteps. People talked to me about that and mentioned that you were following in your footsteps, and that's what I was doing, following. I was not really filling his shoes, but I was at least following in his footsteps.
Well, I think anybody who knew or knows John Hawk would certainly agree with that. He's a real fine physician and Christian gentleman.
No question about it.
Is there anything else you can think of during that time? I might mention myself that you said you made no progress against cost containment. And I think Ms. Green here can verify this, and talking to every past president, cost containment has been one of the big things.
I think that's right.
For many years.
I think cost containment is really the issue right now. The AMA's program for health reform, Health Access America, which is now 2.5 years since it was introduced, its main thrust is really access for people who have no insurance, but an equal part of it is for cost containment. And I think that costs have really gotten out of hand for many reasons. It's not just one simple reason.
No.
And that's also the reason we haven't been able to control costs. But I think that it is going to be the main problem that our society faces as we come up with any kind of health care reform. it's discouraging to me that the proposals that have been presented have not really adequately addressed the problem. And President-elect Clinton's plan is just as weak as the others in really addressing cost containment. Until people are willing to talk about rationing, I'm not sure that we're really going to make any progress in terms of true cost containment.
Now, since your time as president, have you still been active in the State Medical Association and another organized medicine?
Well, it's only been a very short time, I'd say only 6 months, but I'm currently an AMA delegate. We now have term limitations so that you can only be a delegate for 10 years, and I think that's going to be plenty long enough for me, and that may be too long. But I do plan to continue to do that. I enjoy it. I think it's an opportunity to be a part of the decision-making process for the profession, and I think it's important that people who are committed to improving the profession be willing to make that commitment, and I'm willing to do it. I've also this year been on a couple of other committees that are, I think, starting to do important things. One is the HIV Safety Network. We've just gotten that going this year, and I think it's gotten off to a good start, and I hope to stay with it long enough to be comfortable that it's going to be able to do a good job to protect physicians. And then I'm working this year on the Public Relations Committee for the State Medical Association, and that's a committee which has been around for a long time, but we've become more active this year, not because of anything that I did, but because what a single member did. He wrote and suggested that we start doing some things. And as a consequence, the committee has gotten more active, has added some new members, and has now become a very active committee to try to address some of the issues concerning public relations and communication for physicians.
And not only the State Medical Association, but you're active, I understand, in local.
Well, I think you always have to keep up your activity in your local society, no matter how far along you go. One of the things that I've done with the local society this year is to be one of the physicians for the mini internship program, where lay leaders in the community spend 2 days with physicians, a half day each with 4 different physicians. I enjoyed that. I thought it was a good opportunity to have lay leaders learn a little bit about what really goes on in a doctor's practice. I think all of them enjoyed it, and I think that all the physicians did. It was a good exchange on both sides.
Do you have any comment about any particular physicians or legislators or anyone, if you would care to comment on anybody who might have helped you out or been real with you on issues during your presence at the State Association?
Well, we did not have any issues that got really far enough along that it was important to have a legislator for us or against us. As I mentioned, Representative Houck, who is a retired surgeon from Florence, introduced a bill, but that really did not get far enough along to be the major issue that everybody thought it was. I think that the people who have been the most influential along the way have been other SCMA physicians, particularly people who have served in the presidency, have continued to be very influential and committed to improving the work of the association and the medical profession. But I don't have any legislators who I think have been that influential during my time.
Now, you've sort of told us what you think are the major issues in medicine today, but would you sort of sum that up again a little bit?
Well,
just what you see facing medicine now.
The main problem that we have right now are two. We have a lot of people who are uninsured or underinsured. It's estimated to be between 35 and 40 million. And we have costs that are out of control, probably on the neighborhood of 14% of the gross national product this year. I'm not sure what plan is going to be finally approved to address these issues. The AMA has a good comprehensive plan that probably doesn't go quite far enough on cost containment. President-elect Clinton has a plan which he hasn't completely unveiled to address this issue, and his plan is the most likely one to be accepted, but I think he's already beginning to realize just in the month since he was elected, or 3 weeks, that it's not a simple problem, and that it's going to require not only a lot of planning but a lot of cooperation. Those are the two main issues that face the healthcare system. I think that what faces physicians may be even tougher, and that is, how do we adapt or adjust to whatever changes come along? Physicians are what ensure the quality of our healthcare system, and I think that the quality up until now has been excellent. I think it's important that physicians be willing to make the commitment not to lower the quality with whatever healthcare reform comes along. So we need to do that, and the way that I would summarize that is that we need to be the best physicians that we can be, and I think that if we are good physicians, then we will maintain that quality in whatever new healthcare system is developed.
Well, I take it you're optimistic about the future of medicine then.
Well, I'm not sure how optimistic I am. I think it's going to be tough, but I think there are going to be a lot of tough things for the country to face. And I think that it is possible for us to be optimistic about it, but also realize that there's going to be a lot of work and a lot of lumps along the way. I think we're going to take our lumps. We have taken our lumps. But I think it is possible for us to come up with something that is better, not only for our patients, but also for the medical profession, perhaps.
Well, are there any other comments that you would like to make about anything that we haven't sort of covered?
Well, I think it's a tremendous honor to be the president of the State Medical Association. You get a lot of respect from people that you don't necessarily deserve or that you haven't really worked for, and I didn't realize that until I was the president. I guess if somebody had asked me about it, I would have said sure, but to me that was something that was an unpleasant surprise. Like everything that I did in the State Association, I think that you get more out of it than you put into it, and that's probably true for just about everything that we do, and I think that it's important to remember that. It's important also to remember that we need good people to continue to take on tough jobs, like working in their local medical society or the state medical society. One thing that those of us who have been along that road need to do is to bring on the younger physicians, to develop them to be the leadership for the next generation.
Now, would you do things any differently in the State Association if you became president again this year?
Well, when I became the president, I didn't really have an agenda. I think some people have an agenda, but I realized that it wouldn't be possible to correct all the problems that we had in 1 year. And my agenda was really to be proactive, to try to address the issues, and at the same time maintain an emphasis on our role as good physicians. I don't think I would change that sort of no matter what it was. And I really kind of think somebody along the line every few years needs to remind us that there are things besides laws and regulations that are important. And that's why I chose to talk about being a good physician.
Well, I think that was a great theme personally. And one more thing I want to ask you now, other than spending your time in the operating room and in the office, seeing patients, what, and working in the state association and your medical societies, what kind of hobbies do you have, if any other way you spend your spare time?
Well, that's something I've got.
Spares in quotes.
That's something I've got to work on. Is working on ways to spend my spare time better. I enjoy playing tennis. I work out regularly in a fitness center. Probably don't take enough free time to do other things, and that's something that I realize that I need to work on more in the future.
Your activities in your church, with your family.
Well, it's interesting how you can almost overlook something, but although I've always been active in the church, I've been probably more active the last few years, even during the time that I was the president. I started teaching Sunday school 3 or 4 years ago, and I'm teaching the senior highs, which is a job most people wouldn't want to have. But it's been a lot of fun. It's been a challenge. And I think it's in the same sort of way that it's important that people bring on new leaders in the medical profession. It's important that those of us who are committed teach our youngsters in church school as well. So I've enjoyed that. It's been a challenge, but it's also been an opportunity, and it's one of those things also that you get more out of it than you put into it.
Well, good. Dr. Hulk, I think this concludes our interview. We appreciate you talking to us. I appreciate it. Ms. Green appreciates it. And the State Medical Association, with their archives, I'm sure will appreciate it sometime in the distant future. And it's just been a pleasure to talk to you. And I want to ask you just one more question now. Would you do it all over again?
Oh, in a heartbeat, certainly. As I said, that you get more out of it than you put into it, and once you've been there, you realize it. So I would do it again, and that's why I'm still doing things.
Well, good. Well, thank you very much for this
Thank you, Larry. Appreciate it.